psych people. So now I want to take a sec to talk about what goes on in chapter 2, which is on theory and research. So in chapter 2, they go over many definitions, right? So you guys can kind of go through those on your own. A lot of the stuff, like I said before, you can kind of get on your own, but some of the stuff might need some explanation. So the first thing I think that needs explanation is the idea of development being either reactive or whether it is active, right? So the idea between development being reactive, it says that we react to outside factors. So something happens and we react to it, and then we develop from that. Active is our development is set in motion by us. So it's internal, like boom, boom, boom. So we have the mechanistic model, which says that we react to outside stimuli. It says that our development is continuous and highlights quantitative change or things that can be measured numerically, like vocabulary size and height and stuff like that. Organismic model is the opposite. So it says that we are actively and internally motivated, like within ourselves. Our development occurs in stages, it's not continuous, and it looks at qualitative change. So like instead of looking at like how many words is in your vocabulary, you might look at the actual like what kinds of words are in your vocabulary and your types of abilities and things like that. So there are a lot of different perspectives, but we highlight, I think it's 5 in this chapter. Yes, 5. So we highlight the psychoanalytic perspective. This says that our development is shaped by our unconscious forces, things that we don't even, we're not aware of. Learning perspective says that our development and behavioral changes occur as a result of our experiences and what we've endured. Cognitive perspective states that our development is based on our thought processes and mental processes as well. Contextual looks at our development and how it's contingent upon like the social context in which we're in. And evolutionary and sociobiological states that our development is rooted in survival and in our instincts and things like that. Okay, so that kind of looks at those perspectives. But now I want to get into talking about the scientific method. So the scientific method is the same scientific method that you've been using your whole life in your science classes. It is that same one from the 6th grade, right? But now as we get older and as we learn more, it gets a little more in depth, okay? So one of the major changes that you might see with this is that final step, dissemination of findings. That is when you are able to repeat that study or that experiment in order to make sure that you found what you thought you found, the right thing, right? And one of the things that helps that to become relevant is using something called operational definitions. Now, what operational definitions is, those are ways to define things that everybody knows what it is. So, like if you have a research project and you want to study, the color yellow, right? You have to be very specific as to which color yellow. Are you talking about macaroni and cheese? Are you talking about dandelion yellow? Are you talking about sunrise yellow? Which shade of yellow are we talking? Mustard, right? Or do we encompass all shades of yellow? So like you have to be specific so that when people can replicate and you can do that final step, dissemination of findings, right? They will do it on the same thing, and they should be able to get the same results as you, or at least similar, in order to make sure that those results are valid and consistent and reliable. Okay? So we spoke a little bit about qualitative and quantitative when we spoke about the differences in whether or not development is reactive or active. But just to kind of reiterate, qualitative looks at the quality of things. So oftentimes they're not necessarily looking for numbers. Quantitative is looking at the quantity, like from a quantitative perspective. So they're looking at more numbers, okay? So like I've done a couple of research studies, one of which it was qualitative, right? And it looked at what kids were doing in after school programs that were great. There were no numbers, okay? It's looking at what they're doing. It's descriptive. It's, the quantitative one I did, it was for a mental health agency, and literally calling, are you happy? Can you rate your scaling, from 1 to 10? How often are the providers coming? Things like that. So, quantitative versus qualitative. So we also have other definitions. So a sample is, so let's say we have a population of people and we want to know about them. For instance, let's take, I don't know, let's say we take middle schoolers, okay? And we want to know something about them. I don't know what their favorite colors are, right? We can't necessarily say, okay, or let's do middle schoolers in Boston. And we want to know what their favorite colors are. We can't look at all of the Boston schools, private, public, all the schools, and say, okay, let's ask every single student their favorite color. No. So instead, what do? We take a sample, right? So we just take partial, like maybe we might take like a couple of hundred, right? And figure out their favorite colors and measure them like that. That is a sample. That's a smaller subsection of the actual whole group that we want to measure. Now we want that sample to be a random sample, and it should happen through random selection. So when I talk about a random sample, that means that everybody in that group, so all the middle schoolers in Boston, they all have an equal opportunity to be chosen for this study or to engage in the study. Right? That's what a random sample is. And through random selection, it should be in a way, like a lot of times they'll use like computer generated programming and things like that. But it should be in a way where everybody has an equal chance of being chosen. So like you put things in a hat, like names in a hat, and you mix it all up and you take one out, right? That would be something like random selection. And there would, in research projects too, sometimes there are more than one group, right? And sometimes those people need to be randomly put into groups. And that right there is called random assignment. Like you're in group A, you're in group B, right? But it has to be random. So it can't be 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Like, when you're choosing to break up in class and like groups and stuff, it can't be something like that. It has to be completely random, okay? Because sometimes positioning has some bearing on things. Like even like if we think about like that 1-2 method, most people sit near their friends. Most people sit near like people. Some people like to sit in the front. Some people like to sit in the back. Some people like to sit near the window. Like there are all different factors that factor into that. So it has to be super, super random where people get an equal opportunity of being chosen. So how do we collect data? Your slides go into it. We could do self-reports, which are things like diaries, interviews, surveys, questionnaires, right? Naturalistic observation, which is when you go into an environment and you watch the people in their own environment, or you could do it in a lab setting, which is like it doesn't have to be like a lab with like white coats and pocket protectors and beacons and stuff like that. It can be just as simple as a room, and maybe it's just toys are placed strategically so you can watch an interaction. The beauty of lab environments is they allow you to manipulate certain aspects of that experiment. So there are different types of research design. We're going to go over a few. So one is a case study. A case study occurs when you take one person or maybe even like a couple people and you look at that individual or those people. But the issue with those is they're not generalizable. So like, for instance, I want to know what Joe does after school, right? Joe's an RCC student. Let's pretend, right? So I want to know what Joe does after school. I watch Joe for a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe even a month or a year. And every day Joe does this, that, the third. He might go pick up his laundry. He might go to the bakery. He might pick up his kids. He might cook dinner. He might do this, that, whatever. Can I say that all students do that after school? Really, really great information on what Joe does. Not so great as to everybody else. I can't generalize it. I can't say, oh, because he does that, all of them do that. Another type of research design is ethnographic. That's when you're looking, it's more like cultural, so you're going to be looking at more cultures. Correlational is another one where you're looking at the relationship between things that don't necessarily have to be cause and effect, but there is a relationship. So like, I'm sure maybe you guys have heard of like the statistic that says that something like violent crimes and ice cream sales are like almost completely exactly like identically correlated, right? And so basically what that means is every time somebody engages in a violent crime, ice cream sales go up, right? Or if one slows down, the other one slows down, right? Does that mean that people engage in violence and then be like, you know what, I need me some Rocky Road? No. Does that mean that somebody is like, there's some good mint chocolate chip, let me go, punch somebody in the face? No, right? There's a third factor, right? And that's why they're not correlated, because there is a third factor, and the third factor is the heat. With heat, more people are out, more people are acting up, more people are seeing each other, violent crimes go up. With heat, people like ice cream, right? So that brings me to the next type of research design, which is experimental. And this is when you have different groups and you are testing the cause and effect. This is where you actually do see the cause and effect. So you're manipulating something, which is your independent variable, and you're watching the result, which is your dependent variable. For instance, I'll take this class. I say, hey, listen, we're having a test on Friday. Split the class in half in whatever random way I can think of, right? And I say, okay, well, group A, you guys have to study for 5 hours a day. Group B, don't even worry about it. Y'all good, right? So the independent variable, or the thing that I'm manipulating, is going to be the amount of time studied, okay? The dependent variable, or the thing that I am not manipulating, I'm watching, is going to be the actual grades that they earn on the test. All right? So we have experimental groups. These are groups that are actually getting the treatment, and control groups. These are groups that are not getting the treatment, whatever the treatment is, right? There are also, because we're looking at developmental psychology and we're looking at lifespan and human growth and development, there are developmental research designs that are specifically geared towards development. So those are things like cross-sectional. This is when we take a group of people, all different ages, whatever, and we look at their information, we ask them the questionnaire, we view them, we do lab set, whatever. We do the research on them at that one point in time. Okay? So we got a lot of information on a lot of different people doing a lot of different things, right? Longitudinal study is when we take one group of people and we look at them. We might look at them 2 months down the line. We might look at them 2 years down the line. We might look at them 20 years down the line. But it's that same group of people, so we're following them, right? And then there's another type called sequential, and this is when you are looking at people in both ways. It's kind of like the two, longitudinal and cross-sectional, kind of had a baby. So you get sequential, okay? Now let's get into research and ethics. So research has a nasty, nasty history, but we've learned some really awesome things from research. One of the things that was set in place from all the unethical things that were happening is now ethical guidelines. And there's actually an institution that is set in place to make sure that everybody follows research protocol. Life, right? But that institution is called the Institutional Review Board, or the IRB. All right. And so some of the main things that come out of it is that there are certain tenets or rules that you need in order to conduct research, and that's informed consent. We all know what consent is. Consent is giving permission, right? But the informed part is being aware of what your participation will entail, what the study will look like, all that. Like, you're aware of whatever's going on. To avoid deception, that is making sure that you're not lying to people about the whatever's going to go on in the study, what they're studying, things like that. People should know what they're getting into. Now, what I will say is sometimes you kind of need deception, because telling the people will alter your results. It will create like a certain bias. But that's why you have to get approved by the IRB. Okay. Beneficence is another one. That's when you're doing no harm. You're doing more good than you are harm. Confidentiality, you're not you are respecting people's privacy and not telling people, oh, this one was participating in the study and then this happened and that happened. Everything's confidential, is private. And then people should also know they do have the right to leave whenever they are ready. No one should feel like they have to stay. There have been studies that have happened in the past and they didn't do that, and there were significant harmful effects. So that wraps up our chapter 2 slides. If you guys have any questions, always reach out to me.